Welcome to AzureTeach.net.
In this video, we are going to discuss Swagger Client Credentials Flow with .NET 6 Web API and Azure AD. Here I have created a .NET 6 Web API project. First, we have to add Azure AD Authentication to this application. So I am going to Connected Services and clicking on Add a Service Dependency. And I am searching for identity and choosing Microsoft Identity Platform, clicking on next. So here it will display all the app registrations which are there inside my Azure Active Directory and also which are created by the current logged in user. So if you want to associate one of these app registrations to your Web API application, that is fine. But I want to create a new app registration inside my Azure Active Directory. So here I am giving the name as Weather API, because here our primary focus is on Swagger Client Credentials Flow. So I'm not going to add a new controller. So I want to use the existing weather controller. So that's the reason I'm giving Weather API, clicking on register. So what it will do is it will create an app registration inside the Active Directory. And later I'm choosing this and clicking on next. And if you want to add Microsoft Graph permissions or any other API permissions, you can choose here, but I do not want to add them. So clicking on next, and here it is showing a confirmation pop-up that it will generate a code and add few NuGet packages and also updates Azure AD. So I'm clicking on finish. Now this process is complete. So what it will do is it will add the Azure AD authentication over here, and also in the app settings.json it will add the Azure AD configuration. So as this is a web API application and we are not calling any downstream APIs, so these four configurations are not required for us. So I'm removing them. Here I am in Azure portal. I'm going to app registrations, and here it shows the app registrations, and I'm going to Weather API. So the Visual Studio created this app registration and also added a default scope, that is access as user. So if you want to use the client credentials flow, you have to create a client application and give permissions to the client applications on this API. And for that we need rules. So here I'm going to app rules and creating a new app rule, maybe get weather. So here I'm choosing both users and applications, and I'm giving the value as get weather and description also as get weather, and clicking on apply. Now go to app registrations and create a new app registration for the client. So here I'm giving the name as Weather Swagger Client, because a web API works in the client server architecture and our Weather API is the server and we need a client to access that API. So that is the reason here I'm creating a Weather Swagger Client, and I'm clicking on register. Now we have to create a client secret. So I'm going to the certificates and secrets and clicking on add new client secret. I'm giving the name as default secret and clicking on add. Copy this value because it is going to be displayed only once. If you navigate to a different page, it will be gone. So I'm copying it over here and pasting it over. And also I need the client ID, going to overview, and this client ID is needed, and I'm copying it to the notepad. And now I'm going to the API permissions on the client tab, clicking on add a permission, and going to, if you go to my APIs, here it shows the APIs which are created by the current logged in user, but I logged into the Visual Studio with a different user. So I'm going to APIs, my organization users, and here I'm searching for Weather API. And here I want to use the application permissions, and I'm selecting this, clicking on add permission. And now you have to grant admin consent for default directory on this, and this is a mandatory step. Otherwise, the token will not be generated. So I'm clicking on this, clicking on yes. So now the admin consent has been granted. Now run the application. So if you see here, there is no authorize button, so we cannot add any authorization to our requests. So for that, we have to modify the Swagger configuration. So here I'm going to the program.cs, and after add endpoints API Explorer, I'm writing builder.services.add swaggergen, and here we have to pass few options. So here I'm writing a lambda, and after that here we have to write c dot swaggerdac, and here we have to pass a version, and after that here we have to pass new open API info, and to this we have to pass a title. So this is weather API and a version. So this version that we have defined over here must match with this one, otherwise it will not work. And after that we have to add Swagger security definition. So I'll explain this after writing the code also, but let me write the code. So here we have to give a name. So here I'm writing Auth 2, and after that here we have to define open API security scheme, and to this we have to pass our definition. So here I'm writing flows, so we want to use the client credential flow, so it should be new open API auth flows. Then here we have to give the client credentials. It must be new open API auth flow. And after that, to this we have to pass the authorization URL. So here I'm writing new URI of builder.configuration.getValue of string. So we have to get this from the configuration. So here I'm writing Azure AD token URL. So I'm going to define the same over here. So I'm writing the token URL, and we can get this token URL from the app registration. So go to the app registration. So it can be any app registrations. You can go to the endpoints and copy the v2 token endpoint and go here and paste it over here. And after that, here we have to pass the scopes. So here it is a dictionary, so I'm writing new dictionary string comma string, and we have to pass key value pairs. So here I'm writing the key as dot default, and the value we can get it from our API app registration. So go to API app registration, expose an API, and copy this URI. I'm hard coding it over here, but if you want to add this to the configuration and then read, that is also fine. And later we have to give dot default, and later we have to define more properties over here. So here I'm writing in, so here parameter location dot header, and after that here we have to give the name. So here it should be header names dot authorization, and after that here we have to give the type must be security scheme type dot auth2. Now we have to add security requirement. So c dot add security requirement, and to this we have to add new open API security requirement. This is a dictionary, so we have to pass the key value pairs. So here new open API security scheme, and then reference is equal to new open API reference, and then type is equal to reference type dot security scheme, and after that here we have to pass the ID, and this ID must be the value that we gave over here. So I am copying it over here and pasting it over here, and here we have to pass an array of string. So here I'm writing new string and I'm giving API over here. You can give anything that you want. Now let us understand the code that we have written. So here we have added a Swagger duck and telling that we are going to use V1 version of API. And here we have defined a security definition with name Auth2. And here we are telling that we want to use client credentials flow, and this is the URL from which we'll get the token. And when it is calling this, it has to pass this scope. So the Swagger uses this URL to get the token, and after that when it is calling our API and a request is being made to our API, the token that we get will be passed in the header, and the header name will be authorization, and the protocol is Auth2. So after defining a security definition, so here we are adding a security requirement and telling the application that we want to use this security definition as a security requirement by mentioning the ID. So if you see here, the ID over here is same as Auth2. Now let us run the application. Before that, I want to correct an error. So here it must be the token URL, not the authorization URL. And here inside the app settings.json, in the token URL, here we have to pass the tenant ID instead of common. We have one more issue in program.cs. So here first we have to pass the scope URI and then the name. So here I gave the name as .default, but you can give any name over here. So now let us run the application. So if you see, we have authorize button over here. On clicking of this, it is asking for client ID and client secret. So let us paste those details. Here we have the client secret. Now select the default scope and click on authorize. This will not work. Our code is perfectly fine, but we are seeing this issue because of some external factors. Go to the developer tools. So based on this error, what we can understand is our application is having CORS issue. So that is the cross origin request issue, because our application is running on localhost :7200, but it is requesting token from login.microsoftonline.com, and these two domains are different. So what Swagger will do is, based on the information that we provide over here, it uses JavaScript and Ajax calls to fetch the token from the Azure AD. Now I am clicking on authorize again and going to the network tab. So if you see, we have the bad request. So I'm going to the request headers, and if you see here, we have the origin as localhost :7200. So the Azure AD will not return the token if the flow is client credentials and the origin header is present. So if this header is not present, then Azure AD will return the token. But as this is present, it is not returning. And we cannot prevent the browser from sending this. Even I tried adding a custom JavaScript, injected that to the Swagger, but still this was not working because browser adds this origin header before sending the request to the Azure. So we have two workarounds over here, and if you see the GitHub, there are so many open issues related to this, and there is no direct fix available from Swagger. So we have to go with the workarounds, and the same we have done in our project. First, let us go with the easiest workaround. So you have to run the browser in disabled web security mode. So for that, we need to use a command. So here, this is the Chrome installation folder in my machine, and here I am writing cmd, And here we have to use the disable web security command on Chrome. Before you run this command, you have to make sure that no Chrome instance is running in your machine. So I am pasting a command over here. So that is Chrome -- disable web security and user data. You can use any directory over here because we are not going to use this, but that is needed. So now it is showing a warning message that some directory is not present. I mean, we are not bothered about this. Click on OK. Now it opens the Chrome in disabled web security mode. Now you have to copy this URL and paste it over here. Now click on authorize, and here you have to provide the client ID and client secret. So here I have the client secret and here I have the client ID, and select the scope and click on authorize. And if you see, we got the token and the login is successful. Click on this close button to close the pop-up. And now let us test if our token is working or not. If you see the weather forecast controller in Visual Studio, it has the authorize attribute. So we can access this only if our token is valid. So now I'm going to the Chrome, and here I'm clicking on try it out and clicking on execute. So if you see, we got the response. Though this is working, we may not use this in all the cases. Assume a scenario where you have developed an API and you are providing the Swagger information to the external clients. So we cannot directly ask them to run their browser in disabled web security mode. And for that, we can go with the second approach. So before that, let us analyze how Swagger is sending the token. So you can go here, and in the browser, if you see, it is sending the token request using basic authorization, and here it added a token. Let us decode this token. So because the basic authorization uses base64 format, and if we decode this, you see it is adding the client ID colon client secret. So we can create an API which uses this information and fetches the token, and let us write our own API endpoint to fetch the token. Here I am adding a new controller, API controller empty, and I am naming it as Auth controller. And after that, here I'm writing an action public async task of I action result, and here I'm giving the name as token, and it must be HTTP post, and after that I want to name my root as token. And first we have to read the client ID and client secret from the authorization header. So here I'm writing auth header is equal to request.headers.authorization, and after that we have to split this. So here auth header info is equal to auth header dot toString dot split, and here we have to pass the space because the browser sends the authorization header like this, like basic space the token information. So we can use a space to get rid of that bearer space from the header. And later the second part of this splitted array is a base64 string. So here I'm writing base64 token info is equal to auth header info of 1. So here we'll get that base64 encoded client ID and client secret, and we have to decode it. Convert dot base64 string. So this is from base64 string, and here we have to pass the value. So what we'll get a byte array, and we have to convert that byte array to a string. So here where base64 encoded client ID and secret is equal to encoding dot utf8 dot get string. So this way we can convert a array to string. So here we have to pass base64 token info. Sorry, this is decoded one, not the encoded one. And now we can write app is equal to confidential client application builder. So this class is present inside the identity package that is added when we have added Microsoft Identity Connected Service to our application in the starting. And after that here create. So here we have to pass the client ID. So here we have the decoded string that is in client ID colon client secret format that we have seen on the base64 decode side. So what we can do here is we can split the string dot split and split with a colon, and the 0th part is the client ID, then with client secret, and here we have to pass the client secret. So I'm copying this and pasting it over here, and the client secret is at first position. And after that dot with authority, we have to read it from the configuration. So here I'm writing private read only I configuration underscore configuration. Select this, press Ctrl dot generate constructor, and now here I'm writing dollar, and in this I'm writing underscore config dot get value of string, and here we have to pass that configuration property name. So I'm going to app settings.json, so it should be instance, so it should be Azure AD colon instance. So here I'm writing Azure AD colon and then instance. So after that we have to use the tenant ID. So I'm copying this again. So I'm copying the tenant ID. So the instance slash tenant ID is the authority. After that we have to write build, and then where token result is equal to app dot acquire token for client, and here we have to pass the scope. So here I'm writing new list of string, and to this we have to pass the default scope. So again I'm hard coding this over here. If you want, you can read it from the configuration file. And after that we have to write dot execute async, and here as this is an async method I'm writing await, and after that here we can return okay of I'm returning an anonymous object. If you want, you can create a model. So here I'm writing access underscore token is equal to token result dot access token. Now we have to configure this URL inside program.cs. So to get the URL, run the application. So now our token endpoint will be localhost colon 7200 slash API slash auth slash token. So let us configure it in the program.cs. And now this is not required because we are already passing that information here inside the controller. And here I'm putting the URI as http colon localhost colon 7200 slash API slash auth slash token. That is it. Now I'm running the application. So now we are in Edge and the application is not running in the disabled web security mode. So I'm clicking on authorize. If you see here, we have our application related URL. Now I'm copying the client secret and pasting it over here, and I'm copying the client ID, pasting it over here, and clicking on authorize. Now we got the token. Clicking on close. Now let us test. I am clicking on get weather forecast again, clicking on try it out and clicking on execute. So if you see, we got the response and there is no course issue. And still, if you want to make few changes, we can do like this. So this endpoint is for our sake and it is need not to be displayed on the Swagger UI. So what we can do here is we can go here and on top of this action, what you can write is API Explorer settings, and here ignore API is equal to true. So if you write this and run this application again, if you see, we are not seeing that endpoint anymore. One more thing is each time we are providing client ID and client secret, if you want to default these details, that we can do in the program.cs. So go to the program.cs and here in the use Swagger UI, we can write a lambda. And here we can write c.auth client ID. And here we can pass the client ID. You can read this from the configuration file, but I am hard coding it. And after that c.auth client secret, and here I am passing the client secret. Now I am running this. So now if I click on authorize, the client ID and client secret are pre-populated and we need not provide each time. I'm clicking on authorize and now I'm testing this. So we got the response. Out of 100 viewers, only 2 to 3 people subscribe to the channel. So if this video is really helpful to you, don't forget to subscribe to AzureTeach.net channel for more videos. Thank you.